Recognized for your questions.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Portman. And thank you to our witnesses, not only for coming before this committee today to discuss some really critical issues, but also for your service to our country and for your commitment to our security. I want to start with a question to you, Mr. Coleman. As Senator Portman mentioned, he and I introduced bipartisan legislation, the Pray Safe Act. It directs the federal government to establish a centralized clearinghouse of safety and security best practices, training resources, grant application information, and other assistance, all dedicated to securing houses of worship and faith-based organizations. And recently, the Pray Safe Act passed out of this committee with bipartisan support and now awaits action by the full Senate. Mr. Coleman, do you agree that passing the Pray Safe Act and creating this clearinghouse would help houses of worship access federal resources to secure these communities?
I do agree. In conversations with many faith-based and community-based partners, I think one of the challenges that they often have is that they have to go to multiple sources of information to get information from a federal perspective. And also, I think many faith-based and community-based organizations often overlook the opportunities to connect with their state partners. Senator, a good example, I think, is the New Hampshire Houses of Worship resource webpage, which kind of consolidates information at the state level. Being able to have best practices like that, in addition to the resources that help to promote training and preparedness for faith-based and community-based organizations from a federal perspective, would be very helpful and welcome by many of our faith-based and community-based organizations. Our White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, through their Preparing Places of Worship's Interagency Policy Committee, is also looking at similar efforts to come alongside to consolidate those resources and make sure that we can help ease the burden on navigating all of the different sources of information from our federal partners.
Thank you very much. And I think it's just critically important when you talk to faith leaders in their congregations right now. There just seems so much literally to absorb and do, right?
Yes.
Thank you for that testimony. Mr. Logan, Senator Peters mentioned this too. In the fiscal year 2022 funding bill that recently passed included $250 million for the Nonprofit Security Grant Program, which is an increase of $70 million from the previous year. FEMA's Grants Directorate is responsible for administering this program in addition to FEMA's suite of preparedness grants. As demand and funding for these grant programs increase, how can Congress ensure that both FEMA and state administrative agencies have the staffing and resources to effectively administer these grants?
Yes, thank you, Senator, for that. First, we appreciate that the Congress in the appropriation bill that was recently passed did include a provision that allows states to use some of the grant funding up to 5% for their management and administrative costs. That's going to be incredibly helpful to them. They have struggled in the past to administer this program because they have to take those management costs out of another grant program. So this will be extremely helpful to them. I also want to thank the Congress for providing additional resources to FEMA in the appropriation. Is going to be very helpful to us as we take on additional responsibilities and as this program grows. So we appreciate the additional operation and support funding that the Congress has provided. And then should we need more, we'll certainly work back through.
But you feel like, at least as a first step, that what was provided now is something that gives you the tools to be able to address this expanded group and level of responsibilities?
I do, yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Dobish, I want to turn back to the issue that Senator Portman was talking about with you. I want to drill down a little bit more about the recent attack on the Congregation Beth Israel Synagogue in Colleyville. As we've talked about, because he was a British citizen, the attacker in Colleyville was able to travel to the United States without a travel visa. That's because the UK participates in the visa waiver program. I'm concerned that current information sharing agreements don't adequately require criminal record information sharing with the United States as a condition of participation in the program. And Senator Portman really focused on what the British government knew about the attacker's status as a potential terrorist or engaged in terrorist activities. You mentioned that you are going back, DHS, to your British counterparts to look at your information sharing agreement But what I'm really curious about here and want to make sure that we're addressing is how do we find a way to access criminal record data from the UK or from other visa waiver countries that allows for automated searches? How can we do this so that criminal record information doesn't fail to show up when we're vetting people?
Thank you for that question, ma'am. I would say that certainly from an intelligence perspective, we want to leverage the most robust data that we can have available to help evaluate the extent to which someone may pose a threat if they enter the United States. And so part of that is through evaluating and understanding the data that our partners have, and how we can improve our information sharing agreements and our routine and ongoing engagements with those partners to understand that information. And so I would defer to my CBP colleagues and my colleagues at the Office of Policy on more details in terms of the methods in which we will formally pursue that process. But in the wake of the attack, we certainly have re-engaged with our partners to understand what information they had and to really further find ways to integrate similar and like information into our evaluation of individuals who are seeking travel here to the United States.
Well, thank you. What I would be very interested in following up with you on is how we determine what criminal records, if any, trigger an alert that would prevent an individual from participating in the visa waiver program and having to go through the regular visa application and vetting process. So I hope we can follow up with you and related agencies about that, because it seems to me in the world of much more automated data, we should be able to drill down on this much more effectively and protect our security accordingly. My time is just about up. I did want to just mention to Mr. Coleman and Mr. Logan, you answered a question from Senator Peters about how to make sure that the awards in our grant programs are really equitably dispersed. And I would just note that an awful lot of the entities, for instance, who would be applying for houses of worship protection grants, rely on volunteers. They are not heavily staffed places. They do not have professional grant writers. They don't even have full-time office staff often. So I just would really encourage the department to be creative and thoughtful. Mr. Logan, your answer about what you all are doing was very helpful, but I would really look forward to continuing to work with you on that, because you're going to get grant applications where people are doing their best, but they just don't have the kind of depth that sometimes the federal government expects them to have, but they desperately need this help. So thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair.